Hello, and welcome to the IPR Game Room. Today we're talking about nations and cannons. A Revolutionary War setting written for 5th edition, D&D 5th edition rules. We don't usually carry a lot of D&D 5e products, only a tiny handful over the years. But this is an exception. This is an exceptional one, or an exception to our rule, because it's unusual. You don't see a lot of Revolutionary War setting games out there. But before I go into it, I want to apologize for being absent for a month. We've had a lot of work here to do an Indie Press Revolution. It's been a little overwhelming. You probably noticed that none of us have really been producing videos in the last month. So sorry about that. We were really on a roll there for a while, but we've just had an enormous amount of work. We've been to 3 conventions. We've processed some very large crowdfunding projects. We've been extremely busy. We've all had our own sort of artistic and game design projects as well. It's just been a really, really busy period. So before I start talking about nations and cannons, I've actually been doing quite a bit of Revolutionary War, kind of Revolutionary period reading lately. Coincidentally, I've been reading Mike Duncan's excellent biography of the Marquis de Lafayette, Hero of Two Worlds. Much like Duncan's other work, it's very sort of dryly witty, a lot like his book about the late Roman Republic, The Storm Before the Storm, and his wonderful Revolutions podcast, which if you watch a lot of these videos here at IPR, you'll know was also, the Revolutions podcast was the inspiration for another game I reviewed, Red Carnations on a Black Grave, also inspired somewhat by Duncan's work. It's a very good book, highly recommended. I've been reading Nash's Red, White, and Black, which is written in the 70s as kind of an interesting work of proto-critical race theory, kind of, where he examines like history through the lens of race relations during the colonial and pre-colonial period. It's very well written, though a little introductory if you already know your colonial history, because he wrote it for undergraduates. Nash is or was a college professor. To round out the triad of Revolutionary War reading I've been reading Rothbard's completely mad 5-volume history of pre-colonial and colonial America called Conceived in Liberty, which is an ironic title because Rothbard's main point is that there was not a lot of liberty in pre-colonial and colonial America, and he rails against the policies of the nascent states of the colonies for the most part, with a particular eye. Rothbard seems to have been particularly enraged by the treatment of Native Americans, which is interesting and not normally something that people have historically associated with Rothbard. But there you go. I've been reading the books. That's what they are. So I'm pretty well versed in the period under which Flagbearer Games has set their game, and it's very interesting. I kind of shy away from 5e supplements a lot because the designer is kind of forced to take their source material, in this case the Revolutionary period, and kind of fit it into the confines of 5e to make it work. But I think they've done a good job with this. You have a heritage you start out selecting. There's a lot of interesting, but not overly deep amount of information, meaning, you're not having to read a 5-volume set on the matter, but there's heritage information, and then you select a character's background, their class, and some other details when you create the character. Basically, the idea of the setting is that you are kind of an adventuring party. You're like almost a special forces party that's been put together by George Washington or some other kind of revolutionary military leader to go do various ops. And your equipment and everything else is built around it. There really are only 4 classes which are something called Firebrand, and I'll come back to that. Interestingly, Barbarian, which basically means you're a Hessian, which for you German watchers, I apologize for. Perhaps not fair, but that's what's in the book. Or you're a ranger. That makes a lot of sense in pre-colonial America. You don't have spells. You have a thing called gambits, which are kind of like low-level spells, and both Rangers and Firebrands can do gambits. They kind of work like spells in 5th edition. In some case, they are literally the spells from 5e with the wording slightly changed. In other cases, they're entirely new things. The Ranger stuff is pretty obvious. The Firebrand is more like you're playing Thomas Paine or someone like literally a revolutionary firebrand trying to stir up the emotions of people for the revolutionary cause. Interestingly, a little known fact I learned recently, I've begun reading Thomas Paine's collected works, and it turns out the only reason Thomas Paine did not die during the Reign of Terror in the French Revolution is that they had the wrong kind of wooden plaque with a number on it on his cell door. Because after the American Revolution, he went to France to participate in that, ran afoul of the Jacobins, and Robespierre was marked for the guillotine, but they hung the wrong wooden plaque, a little wooden marker on the wrong door, and guillotined someone else and not Thomas Paine. So anyhow, you're basically playing, if you're a Firebrand, Thomas Paine, and that gives you all sorts of these sort of spell-like things that you can do to influence people and events. There's a sample campaign in the back, which is the invasion of Canada, or I should say, for those of you who know your evolutionary history, the ill-fated invasion of Canada. Which is kind of amusing because in real life, tying back to Mike Duncan's book, the Marquis de Lafayette was extremely eager to join the ill-fated invasion of Canada, which obviously did not work. Lafayette, being French, thought he could probably inspire French-speaking Quebecers, probably pronouncing that wrong, people from Quebec to rise up and assist him. But as the Americans invading Canada found out, nobody rose up to support them, quite the opposite. But you're kind of a special ops team in that. It's pretty rich in detail. There's a lot of historical, very interesting, and I believe real life historical figures mentioned as sample characters in this under each sort of class and background that you can choose from. It's sort of surprisingly interesting and diverse, which I knew about the period. I knew the period wasn't quite as dry and stiff as it's generally made out to be. If you to think about the revolutionary period, you can think about the fact that you're also looking at kind of almost the golden age of piracy is kind of right before it. So there was a lot of kind of colorful characters going on in the revolution, like pretty much all revolutions. So check it out, Nations and Cannons, the first book by Flagbearer Games. Interesting how we ended up with this. So when the staff and I were at Gen Con this year, I sent everyone out on a search to say, okay, go out into the show and find roles like small press role-playing game stuff that you think is interesting, that you think we should stock. And 3 people came back, and well, there's only 4 of us, so the other 3 people came back and said, yeah, no, I think this is a very interesting thing. You should go look at it. So I went and spoke to the publishers, and it is interesting. And worth making an exception for the fact that we don't really stock 5e stuff, I think, because I've never really seen one like this before. So check it out. You can pick it up at our store right here at Indie Press Revolution, and follow us on the social medias, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And remember, gamers, when you hear the other side yell, "Front row fire," duck.